What would you say you do here?
Well, look, I already told you. I deal with the goddamn customers so the engineers don't have to. I have people skills. I am good at dealing with people. Can't you understand that? What the hell is wrong with you people?
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. I had a conversation on Sunday. Well, if it was published on Sunday, I actually had it on, I believe, the day before, with H.H. German from Sigma Comics. I thought he brought up a lot of good points. We were kind of talking about criticism in modern comics. And one of the last points that he made, I wanted to expand upon it a little bit here. I'd already planned on talking about this, but I thought he made some really good points, so I wanted to kind of give my take on it. That his position was the comic book creators, like the writers and the artists, that you disagree with their stories, they're not really the problem that you have within comic books. The comic that your problem, the people that you are disagreeing with are really the ones up top, like your executives, your editorial teams, where the agenda, if you want to call it that, the marching orders come from. Obviously, they're going to come up from, at DC Comics, they're going to come from the publisher, Jim Lee, the editor-in-chief, the general manager, Marie Javins, Daniel Cherry. Then they're going to go down to the group editors. You know, you got your Superman group editor, you got probably your Justice League group editor, you got your DC Black Label probably group editor, your Batman group editor. Might need two of those because there's so many Batman books. And then they're going to go down to their regular editors, and they're going to start hiring. Over at Marvel, obviously, you're going to have a Spider-Man group editor. You're probably going to have an Avengers group editor, definitely a Star Wars group editor, X-Men group editor, where C.B. Cebulski, Tom Brevoort, their marching orders go down to somebody like a Jordan White, who's then going to hire a few editors themselves, and they're going to start hiring. So the direction of the company, whether it be Marvel or DC, is going to be set up top. They're going to say, hey, this is what we want to do. This is what we want to accomplish the next year. Maybe we need this many events. We want to feature this character because maybe they're going to be on Disney Plus, or they got a new HBO Max series. We're certainly seeing a lot of Peacemaker over at DC Comics. And then they're going to start giving their marching orders, obviously, to the leadership team, your group editors, and they're going to start hiring. And really, that's where the power brokers are when it comes to the things that are affecting you and I, the comic book reader. It's, obviously, Jim Lee and C.B. Cebulski have a certain amount of power, but they certainly don't feel like micromanagers. Jim Lee feels more like a big picture guy, probably likes to do some art and stuff like that, but I don't see him getting in there and getting into the finer details. Does this Batman story make sense? Or I don't exactly like the direction of this Batman story, and getting into what's actually being put on page and is being presented to the customer. That stuff's happening at the group level, group editor level, and then the editor level. You go over to Marvel, C.B. Cebulski, if you look at his Twitter feed, he's certainly not a micromanager. Unless you're making his sushi roll that day, he might be micromanaging you. But as far as his staff, it seems like he's more of a hands-off kind of guy. Give the marching orders, and you let your guys execute. And if they fail, you bring them in, you talk to them, and hopefully they do it better next time. So really, a lot of the power resides at the editor level and the group editor level, which is really a problem. Especially when you go over to DC Comics, they've lost a ton of their editorial staff. There's been a lot of turnover. Even the editors that they didn't get rid of, that have found safe landing spots in places like IDW and Tapas and whatnot. A lot of their other editors have left as well. Jamie Rich was a big name. He did a lot of the Black Label work. He did a lot of the work with Tom King. Whether you like him or not, they were actually able to sell comics. I'm not really sure how after about halfway through Batman, but it seemed to still happen. He moved on. So you've got a lot of really green, underpaid editors at the DC staff. I've heard that they've had similar things happen at Marvel, but they haven't been as public yet. They had a gutting of their editorial teams as well. But you also have a lot of green people there, very underpaid, living in New York City. Obviously, they're going to have to go into the offices and whatnot, So you're not probably getting the most qualified people. So you have some green people who probably aren't overly qualified for the job, especially at the editor level. You expect the group editors to probably have a lot more experience and knowledge of the characters and the universes. But the editors themselves, Not so much. It certainly feels that way when you look at it. And they're kind of responsible for doing the hiring. Now, let's say you're Alana Smith at Marvel Comics and you're editing some pretty key books. Well, of course, you're going to hire your friends. And it behooves Alana Smith to go out and hire the people not only that she knows, but people that probably in her eyes are even less prepared to be successful than she is. Because when you're in entertainment, a lot of different career fields, you want that job security. You don't want to be hiring the person that's going to be replacing you before you're ready to retire, right? You want to hire the person that comes in here, shows that they know more about the Marvel Comics universe than you could ever imagine, knows more about the characters, and is having to correct the mistakes of the editorial team, right? And all of a sudden, they get a little shine on them. Maybe the story comes out and people are like, wow, this is a take on Black Panther that I've always wanted to see. This really feels like the character. We haven't seen this in a while. All of a sudden, maybe that writer starts ascending up, gets more power than the editor. You think of some writers over at Marvel right now that probably have more power than even the editorial staffs at this point because they can write their own checks. They can actually sell a comic book on their name alone. Donny Cates would be the big one that pops in my mind, at least in Marvel Comics. Over at DC, James Tynion has decided to take his wares elsewhere, but certainly he's still got Scott Snyder there, although he seems to be concentrating on more work outside of DC. But when you have these writers really ascend above the editor, right, to get more notoriety, really start getting noticed once you start getting noticed by the fans and the customers who start buying your books just based on your name alone, you're obviously going to start to get noticed by the executive and the leadership teams as well. So it really, if you think about it, unless you have just an editor that really loves comic books and wants these universes and these characters to shine more than they ever have under their stewardship, like a Denny O'Neil, an editor of that level, you're probably getting safe hires. In some cases, hires that probably shouldn't even be in consideration because they're not talented enough, not experienced enough, don't know the characters enough. And what I'm told by multiple creators that have worked for both DC and Marvel, a lot of times, let's say they bring you on DC Comics and they want you to write a Hawkman story. Obviously, we just got a really great one from Robert Venditti. Wonderful run. Unfortunately, we don't have a Hawkman right now, so they decided to bring me in. When they hire me, it's not based on a pitch. They don't say, all right, Wes, you give us a pitch. Perch is going to give us a pitch. We're going to get a pitch from Tim Lim. You're going to show us where you think the character should go, how it fits in with the continuity, and how it's going to further develop the character for the DC brand, the DC Comics universe, but also outside of it. It's not really like that. From what I'm told, unless you're like a Donny Cates or a Scott Snyder or a Jeff Johns, or I guess even like a Dan Slott, unfortunately, Brian Michael Bendis, like these names that are brands amongst themselves, really what happens is the editor reaches out to you and says, I have a job writing a Hawkman comic. Are you interested? And then, of course, you're out of work, or maybe you only have a couple of gigs. The writing gigs don't pay quite as much. So you say, yeah, of course, I've always wanted to write Hawkman. And they bring you in. And a lot of times, you don't even get to dictate the story that's being told. It's actually dictated by the editorial team. A lot of these stories, especially the miniseries, what I'm told, those are not the ideas of the writers themselves. They're actually the ideas of the editors and the group editors that are in place, and they go out, they hire a writer that they want to write that story rather than the writer that they think best fits that character or has the best idea for the character. So a lot of these times when we're criticizing a lot of these stories, especially if it's not like one of the big name talents, you're likely, if the problem is the story, it's likely not their idea. In a lot of cases, they might be saddled with a really stupid story where they're trying to make the character fit into whatever stupid direction these editors have taken it, because they wouldn't, they're not really qualified to do it either. So you have the blind leading the blind, and you also have less talented editorial team that's in their best interest not to hire the best people, because then they could ascend above them, get more notoriety. And in fact, you look at what happened with Tom King and Mark Doyle. What happens when Mark Doyle brings Tom King on as the Batman writer? he got him fired. Because by that point, this Batman sales were so high, he had enough power that he actually had authority over the editor. And nobody wants to have that. Now you don't have your job security. So, of course, you're going to hire the biggest doofus that you could find that can basically just go do whatever work that you told him to do, not think about it, and just put out book. Because that's what I want you to do. I don't want you to create great story. I want you to put out book. We're going to recreate, this storyline. We're going to do, Spider-Man no more, but we're going to do it for Iron Fist, Alyssa Wong. Yes, I will do that story. Yes, I will replace Iron Fist. I don't think Alyssa Wong had anything to do with it. So a lot of the times, the issues that we're having within the stories themselves, and I don't think there's a lot of creativity, it makes a lot of sense that you're not seeing a lot of creativity out of a lot of these writers because they're not allowed to be creative. They're essentially working within a box of the editorial staff's creation. And the box isn't the character in the universe. The box is the story that they're being told that they have to write for the character in that universe. And that's where we are where we are today. And in that respect, I agree with what H.H. German was saying with what he said. And I can even expand upon it a little bit. We've also got these new edicts that are coming down, and these clearly aren't from the group editors or the editors. These are coming down from leadership, especially on Marvel's side. If you were going to write an Asian superhero, you have to have an Asian creator, an Asian writer writing the comic book. So, it kind of, I see why they're doing it. There's so much outcry and angst on social media and everybody out there that you can't give a Shang-Chi book to a white person or a black person or a Latino person. It has to be an Asian person because only they would have a truly authentic interpretation of what a Shang-Chi comic book could be. Now, whether they're Chinese or not, or their ethnicity or their cultural background actually fits the character, that's not even, that's neither here nor there. You just have to say you're Asian, or they have to be able to say you're Asian. And when you think about that, you have a wide pool of Marvel Comics writers that in essence, or you would think, would be available to write a Shang-Chi comic. Baby Dan Slott has a killer Shang-Chi story he's always wanted to tell, just never had the time. Well, he's not available. You think, well, maybe Christopher Priest, maybe he had that Shang-Chi story he's been holding, and he's just waiting for the opportunity. He's not presented that opportunity. As far as I can tell, and maybe there's a few more, but the four big names at Marvel, if you were writing an Asian character, you can hire Greg Pak, you can hire Gene Yang, you can hire Alyssa Wong, or you can hire Mariko Tamaki. So you have this big pool of writers that, in essence, in theory, it's the entire industry because nobody has exclusives anymore, right? So in theory, you have 1,000 writers that could be writing the Shang-Chi story. But there are only so many that Marvel are currently working with and the editorial teams are comfortable with. So let's break it down and say it's, at any given time, 50 writers that the Marvel editorial staffs, are kind of comfortable with giving an assignment to. All right, so 50 writers, amongst those 50 creators, one of them really has to really like Shang-Chi and have the best pitch possible and the best story that fits the character that's really going to shine the character, grow the character, put that spotlight, and really elevate that character in the minds of not only the Shang-Chi fans who hopefully go out and support it and buy it, but then tell their fans or their friends, they're like, hey, I know you didn't read Shang-Chi in the past because you didn't really like the character, but I think you'll like this take because it's a little different. They've tweaked it here and there. It's still Shang-Chi, but it's cooler now. Maybe this is the one for you. But you've so you don't get the 50, and then you've basically whittled it down to 4 creators because you are essentially casting writers by their ethnicity, by their gender, and by their sexual preferences in a lot of cases. And so you're a bad editor to begin with. You're making up the stories, and then depending on the character, you're narrowing the pool of writers you're willing to work with, so that you can be criticism proof. So CB Cebulski doesn't have to answer another question about Akira Yoshida, or have a negative write up in Bleeding Cool or whatever, trashing him as he brings on Tim Seeley to write a Shang-Chi comic. So in theory, you have 1,000 writers. In practicality, it's more like 50. But then when you actually get to it, you've narrowed your pool down to 4. And we wonder, why there aren't a lot of good Shang-Chi takes on Shang-Chi right now, why there aren't a lot of great takes on Black Panther right now, or why the 2 takes we've had on Iceman since he was outed by Brian Michael Bendis have both been horrendous, because you have, in theory, these enormous talent pools whittled down, based on surface traits and sexuality and whatnot, to almost nothing, and then you have these unprepared green as goose shit editors that are deciding not only who's going to write it, but what they're going to write as well. So in a lot of cases, if it comes to execution and poor pacing and things of that not like that, that is certainly on the creator, but it's also on the editor. But a lot of times, the availability of the assignments, what options that you're given, and the talent pool that's actually even presented an opportunity to write any of these characters, it all ends up being really on the editorial staff who are taking the marching orders from the executives. Editors are a real problem. There are no Denny O'Neills in the editorial pool right now. You've got Jordan White is the group editor of the second most important, I'll say the most important IP at Marvel Comics right now. Jordan White is a doofus. We've explained that multiple times on here, and he has ascended to that position. Before that, he was in charge of Star Wars, which is probably the third most important IP at Marvel Comics. And you're like, well, Wes, Spider-Man's the most important character. But there are only so many Spider-Man comics that can actually sell. In theory, over at X-Men, you could probably get 4 or 5 top sellers if you're doing a good job. Of course, you're not going to get that under a doofus like Jordan White. Jordan White having the position of X-Men group editor is everything you ever needed to know about what's wrong with the editorial staff. And then when you think about how these things are being mapped out, why we're getting the stories that we're getting, and why they suck so much, you can see in a lot of cases it probably isn't directly the responsibility of the creators. It's likely, a series of unfortunate events dictated by editorial. So that's why I got to say to kind of jump on what H.H. German from Sigma Comics was kind of talking about on Sunday on the channel. Wanted to expand on that and kind of talk about why editorial is a severe, and I do mean severe, problem at DC and Marvel. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.